So, we've managed to conquer the lands of Daventry, we've beaten dragons, giants, leprechauns. So what's next on the agenda? Well, I'm going to take this to space. I mean, how difficult can it be? We've bested the lands of Daventry, so what's another adventure?
Well, as it turns out, it's really hard. I mean, if we consider King's Quest to be a good old-fashioned school obstacle course, then we should consider Space Quest as Takashi's fucking castle.
Today I'm going to talk about Space Quest for the next
16
minutes.
Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm covering both the EGA and VGA versions of Space Quest. The EGA version was originally released in 1986, while the VGA version was released in 1991, utilising a more similar engine and gameplay to King's Quest V and Space Quest IV. The game opens with the main character as the janitor on board of the ship Arcada, with his identity being up to the player's mercy in the EGA version, or being dubbed as Roger in the VGA version. Nah, that name Roger won't take off at all, he's more clearly a Squarlow. As far as remasters go, the 1991 version is pretty much identical to the original in most ways, although there are a few different areas that don't affect things too significantly. In both versions, the game begins the same way, with the ship being attacked by Sarians and Roger needing to escape. Along the way, Roger can be attacked by Sarians who are looking to shoot on sight. Much like you would imagine from a Sierra game, death lingers at nearly every turn. While King's Quest certainly had its fair share of deaths, Space Quest certainly took it to another level. Certain screens could even hold multiple deaths. For example, escaping from the ship on the VGA version hosts multiple hazards. Entering the hangar without a spacesuit? Dead. Walk too far to the edge? Dead. Decide to lift off without opening the bay doors? Yup. Dead. Lifting off without buckling up? You'll live. Actually, that's a lie. You're dead. Press a button clearly labelled Do Not Press? Great idea, and you've hopped into a completely different Sierra game. But you're still dead. There are many ways to inevitably kill yourself, and if you're playing for the first time, you'll likely encounter the game over screen quite a bit. In the first game, there's certainly a lot of potential to die, and with the remake, they did what can be considered the polar opposite of Broken Swords Remaster, where rather than remove deaths in the game, they doubled down on that shit. Suddenly, there were even more deaths available, some of which even receiving commentary from the guys from Andromeda, Scott Murphy and Mark Crow, mocking the player for being so foolish. It's the equivalent of that one kid who would make you punch yourself over and over again while going, "Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself?" Eventually, Roger escapes, landing on the planet Corona, a largely unoccupied area, although featuring such creatures as the ever-fiendish Grell and the basketball all-star Orat. Perhaps there's more creatures that might be dangerous, but they're certainly not the worst part about the planet. What Roger needs to worry about are the dead ends. In my King's Quest video, I mentioned that one of the areas I truly disliked in older adventure games was inadvertently trapping yourself into a dead end. King's Quest presented this on a few occasions. Space Quest, however, decides to throw this out there like it's Oprah. You get a dead end. You all get a dead end. Corona shows how merciless Space Quest can be. While exploring the planet, Roger stumbles down a passage which takes him to the lower ground. When there, he needs to overcome a few obstacles, such as a creature nearby that will attack him if he gets too close. Fortunately, the game provides the player with the items needed to overcome this enemy, but that's as nice as it gets. The solution is different in the VGA version, and the items required to pass by in this version are not required in the EGA version. Later, the player stumbles across a laser barrier. From what I can see, you cannot pass by this part without a specific item, a piece of glass you find at the site of the wreckage. In the VGA version, it's very hard to miss it, as it even twinkles like all good shiny pickable objects do in adventure games, glinting in the eyes of all good Magpie-esque adventure game players who need to pick up pretty much everything that's not nailed down. In the EGA version though, it's a completely different story. It doesn't appear that this shows very clearly on the area, and since you need to type to pick up the item, it's likely the player will miss this. Without this piece of glass, there doesn't seem to be any way to get past the lasers. Unharmed at least. With the elevator being only leading down, there is seemingly no possible way to get back to the crash landing site to pick up the glass. Dead end number 1. Another dead end can also shortly follow, where Roger meets with an alien who speaks a foreign language. Unless Roger can find a way to understand them, they pop him back outside. The solution to this puzzle is to use an unknown device from the Arcada. The device isn't very missable in the EGA version, being in one of 2 closets of the room. In the VGA version, however, it's a bit different, and I imagine it could be easily overlooked. As it turns out, the device is a translator that allows Roger to speak with the alien. Without it, the player cannot proceed. When the player first discovers the device in the EGA version, they learn that it's a dialect translator. However, in the VGA game, it doesn't seem like it tells the player what it actually is, but that they can turn it on and off. In both versions, if they leave it on for too long, it runs out of batteries. Dead end number 2 and number 3 together. When the player is tasked with killing the Orat and returns, the aliens are like, "Yes, Queen," and gives Roger a vehicle to ride across the sand, in what is probably the only portion of the game to feel slower than, well, putting the game on slow. The player needs to avoid rocks as they traverse the screen, and they can certainly look to change the speed, but it's not very plausible to have it on fast, otherwise Roger finds him dying again fast. Fortunately, the VGA version does have a skip option, in case the player doesn't really feel all up to task for this. Eulance Flats is another section where Roger can royally screw himself. Upon entering the outpost, Roger is offered to sell his skimmer for 25 buckazoids, and while the offer might be tempting, it's a dead end later in the game. Instead, you need to decline the offer and leave the screen, and then come back where he'll offer 30 buckazoids and a jetpack. Ah, of course, how silly of me, I should have had the foresight to realise that he would offer me a jetpack that I would need later in the game. Roger needs this jetpack later, otherwise he's trapped once he leaves the planet, leading to another dead end a considerable amount of time after the deal even takes place. In fact, another dead end can arise in a similar fashion where Roger will lose the skimmer unless he takes the keys with him, negating him from either offer. These are both even more harsher dead ends than the previous ones, as this will likely be several save states ago, and unless you've been a good little Sierra child who knows how to save in different slots frequently, you might find you need to restart from the beginning.
And that might sound really harsh, but it's that harshness that has made Sierra so infamous. And if you think that's harsh, you haven't seen anything yet.
Many dangers present themselves in Newland's flats, such as faulty ships, greedy muggers, and even deadly slot machines, which are pretty consistent across both the EGA and VGA versions. The slot machines act as Roger's means of making some real buckazoids from selling his skimmer to try and win more money, resulting in either winning money, losing money, or even worse, losing his life. In the original version, this is pretty asinine, as it requires a great deal of luck, patience, and frequent saving. Although if you don't mind a little cheating, you can type in "holy shit" into the bar, and it lets you choose what icons appear. In the VGA version, cheating is a perfectly valid option in the game, as you can use a magnet on the machine to help cash out. This gives Roger plenty buckazoids to make his purchase for a droid and a ship that will help him leave the planet. Once blasted off into space, Roger needs to head off to find the Del Tor, which in itself can once again lead into a dead end. In both versions of the game, Roger needs to sit at the bar and drink several times until he hears one of the patrons mention the sector that the Del Tor was last seen. In the EGA version, the player will need to enter the sector or they cannot proceed. The player will also need to write this down, otherwise they'll need to look up a guide. In the EGA version, the sector will always remain the same, Sector HH. For the VGA remake, that is not the case. The sector will randomise every game. The solution also isn't quite the same as inputting the sector simply like the EGA version. Instead, the player will need to learn which sector the Del Tor is located and then refer back to the manual in order to bypass the copy protection. So you're on the ship, the endgame, the grand finale. In both versions, Roger finds himself up against the Saurians, who will shoot on sight and instead needs to disguise himself as one of them. For the final area, I did expect it to be an unforgiving hell of torment, but fortunately this was probably one of the easier parts of the game for me. There is certainly a fair share of deaths that appeared here, but compared to the previous parts of the game, they don't feel as surprising and catch you out of the loop. After disguising himself as a Saurian, Roger is assigned his own gun, and finally we get to take out all the frustration of Space Quest on these poor Saurians. It's just as well because our clumsy protagonist falls and loses his helmet. As long as the player shoots the aliens quick enough, this doesn't present an issue. But there is one final dead end to appear. One so devious, it could potentially ruin a playthrough unless you did a few things. The Star Generator has a self-destruct mode that can only be engaged if Roger has learned the code. Now I'm going to pull a Time Ripper stunt here and I'm going to backtrack us to the start of the game. On the Arcada, Roger can encounter a dying scientist who tells him to receive the file. In the EGA version, this is found by searching for Astral Body on the computer, whereas in the VGA version, the file is hidden behind a copy protection puzzle, which requires the player to read their manual. The cartridge is important later on Corona, where Roger needs to put this into a computer to receive the self-destruct code for the Star Generator. You know, that thing you need to do to win the game. In the VGA version, I managed to do such tasks, and learned the code was 7873. I was pretty primed and ready to blow up the generator, although then the guy just told me the code anyway. Good job there, fella. In the EGA version, I decided to try and beat the game without the cartridge, but I strongly believe that without a guide, I would not have been able to proceed. In the EGA version, the guard does not seem to provide Roger with the code, and instead player will need to know the code to proceed, meaning that without the cartridge, there's no conceivable way for the player to know the code within the game. However, unlike the VGA version, the EGA version is not randomised, and the code will always remain the same. 6858. So, with our good friend cheating, we can fortunately rig this sucker to blow.
Remember kids, you can do anything you want, as long as you cheat.
With that, we input the code and we book it off the ship before it explodes. And the day is saved. Kinda. In both versions I forgot to bring the cartridge with me, so I may have doomed Xenon to a horrifyingly slow death in the end. But you know what? A win is a win. And at the end of the day, I got to kill a lot of people, so in the end, it was worth it.
I saved the planet and all I got was a mop. Screw this, I am going back to Daventry.
Want to make sure you don't miss out on the next video when it's released? Then make sure you don't forget to subscribe to Noir Reservoir and click that little bell down there to be kept up to date on all future Noir Reservoir videos. Likes and comments are always appreciated too. So until next time my friends, I'll catch you later.